You're listening to Discerning the Forms podcast. I'm Nick. I'll say that again. I had your mic turned off. Who are you?
Okay. Anthony, right? My name's
Yeah.
Anthony, as far as I know.
Oh boy.
How's it going?
Good. Well, for the listeners who are just joining in, we've been having a conversation before we hit record, and mainly because we were
Like a
having
half-hour
technical.
conversation.
Yeah, I know. Which I wish
Yeah,
we
a
could have
half-hour
shared because it was
conversation.
so good.
Yeah.
So
We'll
we're
try and
gonna,
recreate it
yeah,
here.
we'll recreate it as much as we can. We're gonna dive right in. So this is part 2 of our politics podcast, and we've just kind of been exploring where we're at with politics, and what we kind of want to do now is just look at the state we're in today, and without getting like super crazy, we definitely want to get into some kind of diagnostics, which I think will
Mm-hmm.
make us explore political theory a little bit and maybe ask some questions, or at least see what questions have been raised politically. Take a look at where we're at and what
Yeah.
we think is the answer,
Yeah, I think part of it too is I want to try and flesh out some of this interpretive framework, because I think if we just stay in the clouds, or stay, sort of in the ivory tower, and we don't actually allow it to frame and how we are in the world of politics, and how we actually are, like, pragmatically, it doesn't seem to be very helpful for anybody listening who maybe wants some guidance, or needs some ideas, or um maybe is lost like we were at one point in terms of what it means to be a Christian. Because nowadays, I think in 2021, I think it's the craziest I've ever seen it. The political. It's. I mean, We're only what? You're 36, 37. I'm 35. So, like, we've lived a short life, but in terms of our cognitive awareness of political cultural trends, it's the most absurd I've ever seen it, and it's pretty wild right now. So it could be helpful just to, do some diagnostic work. Yeah, yeah. I think technology and social media play an integral role, obviously, in how the states function, how they control, and obviously we've never had anything like this in human history, because all that stuff has just come on so quickly in the past. I would say, like, 12 years. Twitter came out, what, like 2008, 2009, and now it's like one of the main hubs for news for people. The way that news is funneled, you look on what's trending, you go to the topic, and then people are tweeting about it. And I think there's a lot of danger involved with that. Even the way that news functions now, I think John Stewart talked about this. It's like the news is made for 9/11, like, kind of events, 24 hours, constant coverage.
Yeah.
And when you don't have that, then you have what you get now, where it's like they obsess about the strangest things. Or, yeah, just to me, it's just the oddest way of engaging what's going on in the world by 24-hour news cycles, and with different pundits. And obviously each news outlet and major media outlets have their ideological bents to them.
Yeah, and
And
you
so
right, and you
that's what
have
guides them.
and you have discussions today. Is AI technology and machines and robots going to take over all jobs, which that will create more wealth, but we'll be sitting around with nothing to do. And
Hmm.
there's all sorts of weird discussions going on. The debate over the sort of rage against machine debate that will be taken over by AI. All the kind of sci-fi stuff is happening in this
Hmm.
context because we've shifted into a very technocratic world. We have
Hmm.
place we have forums like the World Economic Forum, made up of a lot of the top uh, political and business elites,
Hmm.
and they're kind of cultivating this picture of a future where we'll be sort of um, run by the technology and their control over information, and we'll almost be, sort of the bid, so to speak. That you won't have any property and you'll like it, that kind of thing. And so we're in
Yeah.
a
No,
strange
for real,
world.
it
Yeah,
is that. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I would say that Blade Runner, if you ever seen Blade
Oh
Runner, I don't know
yeah,
if you
yeah.
have,
That's a
but
good one.
that future's not far off. I mean, even the
True.
first one, I think the second one's incredible. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But even the first one, the way that like the tyranny happens is through like consumerism, and the city is like this 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 bed of like rot because of the instant gratification. Technology makes everything instant. There's a lot we could go there, but that is the future. I think. Funny, I think it's like the most prophetic future, a vision of the future, to use the kind of a seer like
Yeah.
future vision
So it's why
prophet.
we
But
need
like,
to have an
yeah,
apocalyptic worldview where these signs and these visions are familiar to us, because it'll help you
hmm
interpret and have a have a literary taste for the world. I don't know if that's a weird way of phrasing it, but
it's a good
you
way of phrasing
understand
it.
it.
Yeah.
So
hmm
let's kind of walk back, and I want to think a little bit about what's going on, what's got us to this point. And I understand there's different political philosophies. I'd be interested in your comments below. So if you're listening to our podcast, um, boy, how do they reach out if they're listening to podcasts, Anthony?
Well, we have a Twitter. We
Okay.
have a Twitter
Yeah, yeah.
discerning the
Tweet.
forums. That's one way. We should probably make a Facebook group or something, or a page or something that
Yeah.
where we can interact that way. But YouTube also,
Yeah.
and Odyssey, I think as well. We have that, so it would
We're
be
almost
interesting
on
to
every
hear.
platform,
Yeah.
Spotify, whatever. But
hmm
yeah, if you want to comment, our email is discerningtheforums@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from
Yep.
you. Anyway, so
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to hear where you're at. I think that depending on what platform you're listening to this on, I could almost guess what your political philosophy might be. Um, but
Yeah.
if you're on Odyssey, I know what your political philosophy is going to be leaning towards. But if you're listening on Spotify, I
Exactly.
don't know. But I just want to take a walk back. So this is just my own take and my own opinion, and you might have some insight, something that I don't see. I'm definitely not as versed in and I'm not like a political philosopher or historian or something like that. Just kind of
Yeah, I'm not
nerding
either.
out. But it's
hmm
important that we try to think through our worldview. So I'm just trying to do that and just sort of expose that
Yeah.
here online. So um,
hmm
as I was kind of prepping for this podcast last couple weeks, for some reason it um, had me go through a rabbit hole of just kind of the history of political philosophy. And um,
Mm.
I think what we've sort of accumulated over the years is we've been able to talk about it, write about it, theorize about it, try different things, have horrible experiences in certain
hmm
places,
hmm
have some
Yeah.
things that worked, had some things that didn't work. We've sort of gathered several questions, and a lot of it is they're kind of footnotes to the Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, and then
hmm
Christian philosophy, political philosophy, especially as it you know comes from the medieval era up into modern times with modern day democracy and things like a constitution, actually is really kind of a derivative of common law, something that grew up in the medieval era. So these things are kind of organic, and they grow into different things, and people react to different political situations. But when you kind of go back to Plato and Aristotle, you get this tension between the collective, maybe as seen in Plato, although you can
hmm
argue it kind of in interesting ways. But let's say Plato has this idea of there's there's abstract truths about the way a society should run and be governed, and a philosopher would discern that. So we need rulers who are smart, but who control all of society, and everybody has their place within society. Their work, their play, their celebrations, their feasts, their labor, their class, that kind of thing, all has a way of functioning. This is similar to the caste system, I think. Different but similar. And so Plato has this idea of how is that ordered so that humans flourish, or that we experience the good.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side, maybe you could see something towards the thought of Aristotle, although you could actually pull some interesting pre-Socratics or Stoics to get, I think Stoics especially, to get like more of an anarchist perspective or individualist perspective. But I would say Aristotle's a little more, he takes it in a kind of a pragmatic direction, where he's more interested in, okay, well, what would it look like to have a good society? Well, it would be a society that shows more virtues, it's virtuous, and it's that holds these things in moderation, the golden mean, and so, or holds all their work, their goods, all these kinds of things are moderated. They're not totalized or something. So
sure, virtue is the fundamental thing that drives people. Yeah,
virtue drives a good society. Good society. Okay.
I don't disagree with either of their positions.
Yeah.
I'm like, they both sound like we should do both.
Right.
Have one have an understand. Well, I mean, like, what we could talk about too is like it's both fundamentally rooted in anthropology, like what people are, right? Like who human beings are.
I think that's the difference.
That's what drives their interpretation. Yeah.
I think that's the difference between modern political philosophy. Here, we're almost driven more by economic gain, or maybe someone could maybe have a different idea. But I think, I don't know, what I discern it'd be something like where we have economic empires, and they're driven towards high gains, and kind of, so you brought up Blade Runner. It's kind of got that kind of feel. But
it does, yeah, for sure. For sure.
But in the ancient world, it was more about what made a good life. Is someone seeking wisdom. Christianity picks up on that. I have so my favorite thing going into this, and if anyone can see this is St. Augustine in his political writings, which of course you can find most of it in the City of God. But he also had letters that he wrote before he wrote the City of God to different pagan interlocutors on various subjects. But what I love, and this is, this goes to the heart of Augustine's philosophy. But in the City of God, trying to see which book it is. So this would be book 14. So book 14, chapters 4 to 6 and 7. In that, as he walks through this section, he talks about love and desire as at the root, and how that's ordered at the root of what makes something good or bad, and what makes something faithful to God, or what would really amount to societal problems. And we could get into that.
Yeah.
Because Christianity brings with it this narrative, this worldview of creation, fall, and redemption. And I think Augustine is just amazing on this, that sin is disordered loves that are not unto the end of glorifying or pleasing God, or in our not just because we fear God, because we fear hell or damnation, but because we love God. He's
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate good. And
Yeah, he is the good that our heart desires.
yes. And
Yeah.
so when we see problems in our society, they're, violence, for instance, would be rivalry that comes from the envy and the lust for power, lust for the covetousness and envy and so forth, that are disordered loves. It's not wrong to desire another, to desire certain good, but as an end in itself, it's disordered. It's wrong. But
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
enjoy the thing as something God created and to share it with community. And I don't mean like economically necessarily, but to share
Mm-hmm.
something good with someone else, like an experience, position, those kinds of things. That these are better
Yeah, it's a
forms.
gift. Like
Gift.
creation itself is a gift, and we receive it as a gift, so we want to share it as a gift. That
Mm-hmm.
is like the ultimate way of thinking about like a sort of redeemed or on the way participating in the redemption of the world as first of all recognizing it as gift.
Yeah,
Yeah. Rather
absolutely.
than first it's scarcity and then how do we
Mm-hmm.
best supply, best exploit the scarcity, but
Mm-hmm.
that it's a gift
Right.
first and foremost.
Yeah. So the way I
Yeah.
think we approach it now, again, we bring in that for as Christians, we bring in that um, Judeo-Christian perspective that the ultimate end is to love God and love neighbor. And so that's what creates a
Mhm.
covenantally good society, something that will flourish. So the reason I don't murder is because I love my neighbor. The reason I don't take their stuff
Right.
is because I love them and respect them and follow Jesus in the particular way that he says treat others the way that they would like to be treated. In the sense of um, I'm considering my neighbor. I'm considering God and worship. Worship again is at the
Well, that
heart.
there's yeah, like there's like the idea of love is that there's somebody other than me in the world. That I'm
Absolutely.
not the center of gravity and that there is an other who is conscious, who is made in the image of God, who is part of God's who God loves
Mm-hmm.
and who God calls me to care for them in
Yeah.
his love by participating in the spirit in Jesus. That's what drives us to care for our neighbor, not because of
Mm-hmm.
arbitrary laws that like if you break them then you go to hell. It's like
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
actually it is motivated primarily by because we don't see the world aright, and when we start
Mm-hmm.
to see the world aright, that's what causes us to act more properly is
Yeah.
because the scales have fallen from our eyes and now I'm starting to see why I need to participate in God's love because it is the truth of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The world is a gift. But yeah, all that stuff is
Mm-hmm.
just that's what love is. That's what
Yeah.
loving your neighbor is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is hard, but like you said, it's the heart of it is worship.
Yep.
That's the fundamental
If
thrust
it's
of it
not a
is
gift,
worship.
if it's become a burden, we know it's not from God. You know what I mean? If the life
Yeah,
I'm living
totally.
has become a burden, there's disorder there. So I think of
Yeah, totally.
humility is understanding ourselves as images of God, as his creation, which both gives us
Mhm.
confidence but love and respect towards the other. While at
Mhm.
the same time not elevating myself above someone else in some particular way. Um, so if I'm doing that, I'm living this life and like I've created a situation where I have no friends because I'm so prideful and such a jerk. Like,
Mhm.
this has become for me a burden, not a gift. So yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. I think these are better ways, maybe,
Mhm.
of approaching how then we think about political. Once we start entering into the world of political ideology, as Christians carrying this with us, we have already a perspective that desires something out of what we're looking for. So let's say we're studying
Mhm.
economics and how it relates to policy or something. We're not just thinking about like, well, what gets the maximum gains for the maximum amount, or what is the maximum
Yeah.
good for the most amount of people. We're thinking in
Mhm.
terms of the way humans flourish, and the economics would really just be prudence. It would just be prudence with
Mhm.
scarce resources, and how those would
Yeah.
be the best way to deal with those. And we brought this up in our conversation before, but this really leads us in politics, and you just can't get away from this. Your anthropology, what you think about what humans are, what they're about, and what they can do, determines how you're going to approach those things, right?
Mhm. Oh yeah, I think. Well, I mentioned in our brief conversation before, but I saw somebody in Twitter. I'll have to. I feel bad for not linking the person, but um, they said any good political theology starts not with eschatology, but with anthropology. That's the sort of the ground, because to have eschatology as uh, your main thrust, like if eschatology is the way you're thinking about um, doing uh, politics, then you're thinking about something that is not in your control whatsoever, right? Like the end, and this gets into American politics with especially American sort of fundamentalist evangelical perspectives about, if you interpret Revelation a certain way, if you interpret, the end times in a certain way, it's going to inform your politics very heavily in the ways of like, okay, we need to love Israel because Israel is the ally. And then we have to, all loving Israel involves a lot of other things, which again, Israel, I'm not an anti-Israel person. It's just more about
Sure.
how you think about the American government should be functioning, and you think it
Mm-hmm.
should be functioning as uh, a sort of reductionist Christian view about how the kingdom of God is going to be made manifest in the world, and right, that is through um, how can I put this well? It's made manifest through the certain types of theological premises that the government needs to be this, 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 and this. And then we need to live this way. And then through that will help the kingdom of God become more manifest. And then you get opposite views of that, right? The more liberal kind of perspective, but that's not for our conversation now. But sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here. Can you bring me back to
Yeah, you're
where we
fine.
started?
Uh,
I kind of forgot where I was.
I'm thinking a lot about what you're saying, so I got derailed too with you. But it's important for us to remember that the kind of state we have now is nothing like it was before. And,
Yeah.
there's a lot of good things that have changed, but um, I don't know about with the state. I mean, that's a different issue, but we have to realize when we're
Mhm.
reading, when we have our Christian perspective, we have our Augustine, and then we just jump into modern policy and how it relates to human
Mhm.
flourishing. Like that's not
Yeah.
necessarily going to work the same. And my example
Mhm.
is, Saint Augustine, his letter on war and just war
Mhm.
theory. Just think about the state we're in right now, with Afghanistan and everything else.
Yeah.
Um, and ask yourself, is anything justifiable according to Saint Augustine's just war theory? So,
Yeah,
it,
it doesn't that does not work at all, yeah. Sorry, it
yeah,
really does, yeah, nothing works that way.
right,
It's not a one-to-one
yeah.
ratio.
So we might ask, and this is a strange thing to ask: is was the state even maybe in some ways better back in medieval Christian? I mean, I know people would be floored by even mentioning that, but in what ways, And I think
Yeah.
though we want to tread careful water here, I just want to continue to make that point that having our Christian theory and our Christian philosophy, and then trying to think about how we love our neighbor and stuff, we really need to take a hard look at where we're at now in this kind of
Mm-hmm.
heavy state technocracy, where
Yeah.
a small amount of the 1% of individuals are gaining massive amounts of profits at often at the I'm not talking about just like through trade and markets, but at the expense of um,
Mm-hmm.
human taxation, exploitation, and propping up certain kinds of
Mm-hmm.
industries and so forth. So, I
Yeah.
think it's kind of a call for the left and the right,
Mm-hmm.
whatever your tendency is as a Christian, to kind of actually take before slow down and think about what's happening now and the
Yeah.
presuppositions you have as a Christian, and
Well,
notice
I
the
was gonna
difference.
say even yeah, I would say even say the modern like liberalism as a philosophical underpinning
Like
for like
classical liberalism. Yeah.
The American Republic, right? Like classical liberalism, or because technically America is a republic, technically speaking. That's how it started. Now I
Right.
think we think of it more as a democracy because we're very vote conscious, and like we have to get the vote out, and so we have this notion of democracy. Um, but for
Even
me,
though we
it's like
still have
there is a
representatives. Yeah.
even those representatives, it's still apparently a democratic state or a
Right.
democratic
Sure.
but so we're under even that is underpinned by a certain human anthropology, right? Like this is not, it doesn't escape that fact that people view, so like Augustine and Plato and even Aristotle, right? The good of society is the good that the society is founded on is either like the virtue of the pursuit of virtue. uh Plato talking about the what context makes people, it causes human flourishing, what is the good that causes human flourishing, or for a sort of philosophical liberalism, classical liberalism, right? It is the idea that a human person is a rational being who makes choices in their life, and that what is the good in any sort of, like for America, like I'm just gonna sort of do some diagnostic now of both right and left. You have the sense of the good for the right would be um, low taxation. Both sides want people to be free from the wrong kinds of restraints, the choice to choose, whether it's like in commerce or in like sexual identity. That's what the good of our society is, like the endless ability to express our individualism. That is what the good is in the classical liberalism, and it sort of manifests differently for each side. I think both left and right in American political culture, whether you have the choice of pronouns or say hyper masculinity and hyper femininity. Like let's go those two extremes, right? So you have on one side
Mm-hmm.
uh extreme ideological bent towards men are a certain kind of thing and women are a certain kind of thing. Then there's this sort of reaction in the other side of like gender is fluid, there isn't it's not only two genders and this and that. But what I think is really important to notice in these contexts is that like you said, like there's a desire for me to be liberated from my own chains, but I need to be able to control what you're doing because it affects my own liberation. So then it becomes this sort of war, this really strange
Mm-hmm.
war, which it is I mean, you could say it's a culture war, but it comes out of this very strange, I don't know, like there is no other really in
Mm-hmm.
either case. Like there's no respect for other people really. Like there is respect for people who share similar views and values as we do, but in terms of actually being an other that I love and serve, and it kind of isn't about, I don't really need to control them. Uh that doesn't exist in American political culture. And I was going to say um there is, oh gosh, what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought here. um there is a sense in which Sorry, edit this out. I'm kind of forgetting what I was going to say.
That's right. I
Crap.
yeah.
Sorry.
So
Yeah. Continue.
yeah, I think that's well. Okay, so we're kind of getting at some of the diagnostics because it
Mm-hmm.
really goes back to the individualism. And I'm not talking about
Yeah.
individualism now as it relates to, because here's what we're doing: we're transferring this idea of political individualism into all sorts of different aspects now of political reality. Now that we have a highly centralized technocratic state, and that's starting to play itself out in very interesting ways that have actually become even coercive for individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And um,
Well,
so going back to
yeah.
that debate of collectivism, individualism, I think
Mm-hmm.
this is a problematic dichotomy in itself. Not that there aren't concerns, because when we start thinking about, like personal ownership and stuff, what people are trying to really carve out, like when it's, let's say, libertarians, a classical liberal camp and libertarians, they're trying to carve out some kind of picture of how we can be free from violence, or free from
Mm-hmm.
those
Yeah.
things, violence from others and violence from, how we can
Yeah,
be free
the
and
non-aggression
nonviolent.
principle,
Yeah,
right? Like, yeah,
right,
like you don't aggress against another person's property.
right.
Yeah.
So, but in the positive sense, it's turned into this: how do I be free from all constraints, which isn't necessarily what
Mm-hmm.
the classical position was, or the libertarian position.
No. No.
And so I think that we're in this stage right now where we can't be just hitting on talking points per se, and we can't just bring
Right.
our presuppositions need to get in a little deeper, and they need to critique the
Mm-hmm.
foundations.
Yeah, I think a diagnostic work is not about tossing out the same old cliches you hear on whether it's like left news outlets or right talk radio or something.
Right.
Like the critique to me has to be deeper. And I think it has to affect everybody, because I do think in some sense, going back to the sort of hyper femininity or the sort of trans pronoun perspective, you get this sense in which like the majority of people in life are burdened and oppressed by expressive individualism.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like there's a way in which like not everybody functions well in that kind of culture space, that like you have to know everything about yourself, you have to know everything that you believe, you have to constantly obsess about saying the right things, putting it out there correctly, making sure you're doing this and that. And it becomes like a law unto itself, whether hyper or that, whether it's like the sort of extreme right or the extreme left. It is like a
Yeah.
law that like oppresses, and it's like a burden.
Right.
And so to me, it's like what's going on there, and how can we do a deeper dive into, okay, there's clearly a lot of issues going on. And even so politically, why do people want to use the state to force other people to live in a certain way, right? That
Mm-hmm.
has nothing to do with collective good, but all about to do with your own individual good. Because, like you said, there's sort of this dichotomy between the collective and the individual in our minds. But
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, I think, bridges that gap between the collective and the individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like Paul's analogy of the body,
Yeah.
right? The body has parts, but it's a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So like losing a part would lessen the whole in some sense. So it's like there's a beautiful transcendent perspective there about, yeah, we are still people, we are persons, and we are individual persons, but as a movement, especially as the church, you're part of a larger body, that you don't exist as a Christian without the larger body context.
Right.
You know, like you're an
Yeah.
individual, but like you need to be connected to the body.
Yeah, because what resolves that, and that's just that's a beautiful insight. Eden Rosenstock Husey, philosopher, believed that we get even our ideas about individual liberty, or even seeing a person as an individual, from the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that grew out of
Right.
the doctrine of the Trinity. So, but in this Trinitarian perspective, we're we're not isolated atoms, you know,
Mm-mm.
individual,
Yeah.
pieces of, we're not animals in the wild in survival as it is, but we're interconnected. And it's the
Mm-hmm.
sin, it's the fall, it's the abuse that we have towards each other that's creating the problem. It's me wanting to
Yep.
take power over you, or wanting to take your stuff, or wanting to murder you, or envying or coveting your wife or whatever it is. And so it's those kinds of things from the Christian perspective that are creating the social ills and social problems. And when those things are much more in a healed state, or much more tempered with justice and righteousness that comes from reconciliation and
Mm.
cooperation in communities, that these things lessen, and that as the kingdom of God grows, more and more flourishing can exist. So even from a Christian
Yeah.
perspective,
I think
yeah,
no, I agree. I completely agree. I think I was having a conversation with my wife the other day about how people tend to be really critical of ministry, and especially people in ministry positions. Um, yeah, well, I would, because it kind of gets at this notion of like the abstract and the concrete and the individual and the sort of collective. And I said, I just remarked to her about how easy it is to be really hypercritical of people in ministry positions in the abstract. You see them maybe not necessarily as an other, but as something that, which to be fair, leadership positions should, and especially in the church, should have the openness and willingness to be critiqued and hear those critiques and like sort of have conversations about that, because we don't want any sort of totalitarian nonsense within the walls
sure,
of the church. You don't want that. It's the opposite of Christianity. But in some sense, so just say for you and I who are in ministry positions,
mm-hmm.
you recognize how messy things actually are, and
Mm-hmm.
how when you want to actually cooperate with people, when you actually want to work with people, you
Mm-hmm.
can't take overly harsh stances against people. You can't speak to them in certain ways. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? You can't be uh, like raging angry at somebody. Like you can be angry and you can express the anger, but I think you do it as like you're an other and I need to clarify to you that like this made me angry.
yeah,
Not, talking
mm-hmm.
to them as like a wall, or like assuming that they're going to react this way. Or so I've just learned in my own, especially jumping on in ministry of the year of COVID,
Mm.
things got really messy for me. So I had to really start to rethink even some of my own patterns. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, but that goes back to this, even the notion of what the state is. It's always abstract for us when we're talking about it, but
Mm-hmm.
then when you see it manifest in the world, like as a physical, which it never really is, like the state is not like an actual physical entity. It
Yeah,
is
I want to get
abstract.
into that. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
what to just riff off of what you're saying here, I think that's so insightful. You get this when you have kids too.
Mm-hmm.
Man,
Big time.
just
Yeah.
try just try to control your kids, right? Like
Yeah.
learning parenting skills is hard, because you can't just
Oh
like
yeah.
um just jump in and into your kid's own skin and like make him do something or whatever. and
Nope.
and the certain approaches you take create certain kinds of reactions
Mm-hmm.
and so forth, or they shape your
Yeah,
kid in
if
a
you're
particular way.
constantly yelling,
Yeah,
if you're constantly yelling at
yeah,
them, they're gonna tune it out eventually
yeah,
because it's
exactly.
not
Then
effective.
you have to keep yelling louder and louder and louder, and yeah, it's not effective, and they learn to tune
Mm-mm.
that out, and then so you have to deal with that. And so
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. It's like any
Yeah.
kind of management in society. So I do think, then to I what you mentioned, I think is key. I want to know before we think too hard about politics and government and state, is where can I go out, reach, and touch government? Where is it? Does it exist anywhere? Is it some kind of space?
Well, it depends on how you define existence, first of all.
Right.
Uh, I think, well, yeah, there's a lot of quippy things I want to say, but in essence, probably not. not in the way of like
I mean, I could touch Washington
as a
D.C.
yeah,
Yeah, I could touch a
sure,
Capitol building or something like that. I could go downtown and touch a
right.
courthouse or but
But those are
uh
like symbols. Those are,
yeah,
which symbols are an actual like a concrete manifestation of patterns. So,
yeah,
to be fair, that
right,
is like a some sense like a manifestation of the pattern of the American political system,
yeah.
but
It's
it's deeper than that, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. So they're institutions that we've given particular authority and have certain kinds of power that they can wield. I mean, just try
Mhm.
not paying your taxes for a while,
Yeah, you'll
and
find out real
you'll
quick.
find out. Yeah, you'll find out. There's somebody comes knocking at your door, and
Mhm.
it's because they one you not paying your taxes triggers this agency, then this agency, then this agency, to then trigger this agency to go get you, and
Mhm.
all of those people acting in those agencies believe in what they're doing, and they believe that what they're
Mhm.
doing is what they have to do because they're civil servants or whatever else. There's a sense in where
Right.
it is ideological. The ideological is real because we manifest that in real social relationships. But
Mhm.
it's important that as we think about even modern day politics, there's a lot of things that that we kind of assume as arranged, as set, fixed, concrete, maybe uh, real, but that haven't always been or could be different, given we thought about them differently.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we have to take technology and our presence on the internet and social media. All that stuff has to be taken into account of how we think about the state, how we think about politics just broadly,
Mm-hmm.
because it shapes so much about who we are. Like Facebook shapes how we, uh,
View
I would say
holidays or
Twitter
something.
shapes how we think. Yeah, like, well, yeah, it's like Twitter
Yeah.
shapes how we think. Facebook
Mm-hmm.
teaches us what we well, Amazon teaches what we desire. I forget. I quoted this guy in a paper once about technology and
Mm-hmm.
Christian ethical responses to it. Um, but there's a way in which we're completely shaped by algorithms these days.
Mm-hmm.
From each of these websites, they have these really complicated algorithms that basically churn out what we want to see and what we want to hear,
Mm-hmm.
and through that shapes our desires and our loves. Right, to go back to sort of anthropology,
Mm-hmm.
it there's a real danger and a subtle danger in how these corporations function, and how they are no longer separate from government entities, at least completely.
Mm-hmm.
um because now you have like Facebook being called to Congress to testify, and um
Mm-hmm.
it, we have to, like you said about rethinking about all this stuff, we have to consider those as a part of the conversation as well when we're engaging deeper about how do I think about living in the world as a political animal in America.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you have to reckon with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. These are like major mega, which sounds really silly, but there's almost like they're like a dragon or something with like
Sure.
different heads.
Yeah.
And to use sort of apocalyptic
Sure.
symbology, it's
Yeah.
like we need to sort of have that in a way so we can know that like these are not like our friends. They're not really on our side. As much as we like to think that they are,
Mm-hmm.
they're cultivating in us a way to keep us on their platforms.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they desire. If people aren't going to their platform, they're not going to exist anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
they have to figure out better ways and deeper ways.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, not to get too much into this, but in 2014, Facebook did an emotional manipulation study that they didn't let anybody know what they were doing. Some 500,000 profiles. They manipulated their timeline, whether it was like positive or negative, and they
Hmm.
showed that they could manipulate people's emotions that way.
Wow.
So it's a published study, and you can go find it.
That's
It's
crazy.
there, and it should scare everybody. And the
Mm-hmm.
question that one of the essays that I read about that he posed a question. He's like, well, if people know this, Facebook played their cards, and people are still coming onto there and going back to it, and they know that this happened. So why is that? And again, deeper realities about algorithms, desire to be in community, desire to be heard, desire to express. All of these are manifested pretty heavily in Facebook's like system,
Mm-hmm.
And which is, I use Facebook, you use Facebook, a lot of
Yeah.
most people I know use it.
Yeah.
But I'm less and less engaged in
Most
it
people
just
we
because
know
of,
are in their 30s, right?
in their 30, most of us millennials,
Elder millennials. What is
elder
Gen Z?
millennials.
Everyone else is using TikTok or something, but
Yeah, Gen Z's TikTok, which I'm proud to say I've never had a TikTok profile,
yeah,
but
I can't get myself to do it. It just I feel like a little kid
it
or
feels
something.
cringy, man.
Yeah, it's
It
real
feels
cringy.
cringy and weird, and like this, I feel creepy having a TikTok being
Yeah.
35
Not
years
that I'm
old.
excited I'm on Facebook either, but at least I get to show pictures of my
No,
kids, so
yeah, it's a little bit less like,
my grandmother's on
because
there, so
TikTok,
yeah.
yeah. Well, there's like certain rhythms that each what I notice is there's certain rhythms that each platform has about like what's popular, how to get popular,
Yeah.
and you have to follow the sort of trends. And TikTok is like this real weird space where I just don't know if I understand it well enough, or if my attention span might be too long for it. Like short videos to me are like annoying.
Yeah, I'm the
So
same
I
way.
need like longer form
It's my problem with Twitter.
media.
I think the only thing I like about Twitter is when people have these little one-liner quibs against something, that otherwise I can't.
Yes.
It's too ADD for me. Like it's just
Well, what you just think about what you just said there though, like the one like one line quib, like that's
yeah,
teaching us how to communicate in a certain
right.
way, right? Like it's funny, like
You have
that
to get
affects
creative in
us.
that space, and those who are creative flourish
Yeah,
in
and
that way.
it shapes you how you engage this like conversation with people.
Yeah,
And are there even really people on the other side? You aren't always sure. You don't always know.
yeah. So
And you should be suspicious of it.
yeah, so if we're just kind of running on autopilot here, I think
Hmm.
we're gonna allow others to speak into and control our lives. Not that it's about not allowing others in, but when they're doing it
Right.
seductively or for some kind of gain, this should make us suspicious. If it's your community, if it's your loved
Hmm.
ones, if it's and they're having a conversation and you're in conversation with them, that's real. And so maybe there's ways
Hmm.
we can be more intentional about that and build a world within this world that dis- that displays the love of Christ. So, can we get into next week what we think a more Christ-like politic would look like?
Oh boy. That's the tall order, but sure, I'll think about something. I mean,
Am I promising
I have
too
my
much?
initial
Yeah.
responses, but no, I think
Yeah.
it's a good way of getting something concrete,
Yeah.
like getting some sense of a concrete vision about
Yeah. And I'm not
what
saying like
we,
what we're going to
yeah,
say is what Jesus actually thinks or something, but it's more like as we're journeying on the way, how do we work towards something that is a peaceable kingdom?
yeah. First is like recognizing the algorithms that control us.
Mhm.
That's the first step to me. That's going to
Mhm.
be my first step. I'll say that next week too. It's like
I like that. Yeah.
we have to get out of the, like you said, like who are we allowing to speak into our lives, and what are we allowing to shape us.
Mhm.
And so often, like I'm as susceptible as anybody.
Sure.
These
Yep.
platforms
Me
shape
too.
me in a certain way,
Mhm.
and I feel each one differently in a
Mhm.
different way. It's funny, and that's an
Yeah.
aesthetic experience for sure. But
Mhm.
uh yeah, next week we can talk about that'd be good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on Discerning the Forums podcast. Again, what do you think? Email us at discerningtheforums@gmail.com or comment on our Twitter or send us
Mm-hmm.
comment in YouTube or Odyssey or whatever platform. Hopefully, if it's a platform like that me, elder millennial, can't find, I don't know if I'll find it. But if it's on one of the platforms mentioned, we will.
We're
see
not
it.
on TikTok.
We're not on TikTok.
We'll never be on TikTok.
All
Ever.
right. Thanks, Anthony.
See you, Nick.